My first proper winter coat was black, with fraying bits of thread hanging off the sleeves. It was a loan from my friend Elsa, who for some reason had a men's black coat hanging behind the door to her rented room when I moved to Spain. It might have belonged to her ex or something. I can vividly picture myself walking up and down Madrid's Paseo de Extremadura in that frayed black coat, my long hair falling in my eyes, cold and lonely, a new immigrant, 6,000 miles from home. I lived in that area from 2004 to 2005, two peak years for Spanish immigration, and the economy was booming. Little did I know that I was part of a demographic shift affecting the whole country, and that Spain was changing quickly. I was just feeling cold, hungry, and totally alone. Although totally alone wasn't quite the case. I knew Elsa. I had her to thank for the hand-me-down coat. But as I quickly discovered, Elsa's whole thing was basically sitting in her room and smoking. She was from a Central European country whose government heavily subsidized her, so she was on a different immigrant hustle than I was, one that involved hefty unemployment checks from back home. She'd get jobs in cafes under the table, and soon quit or be fired and go back to her room to spend several more weeks sitting on her mattress on the floor, smoking. I got a job teaching English, also under the table, because I didn't have work papers. Illegality aside, it was a step up from my previous jobs, which had all paid around minimum wage and had mostly required mopping. The money wasn't bad compared to U.S. customer service wages, and being a teacher was a step up for my self-image. I was on my way towards respectability. Not bad for a college dropout from the Arizona desert. What is immigration, anyway? Immigration is a big topic. Immigration in Spain is a more manageable one. My own immigrant story is small enough that I feel comfortable talking about it, but is it representative? I don't know. I might not be the typical immigrant. But then again, with around 250 million international migrants around the world these days, who's typical? The phenomenon of immigration is huge and defies stereotypes. Spain has immigrants who come from the elites in their own countries, highly skilled and educated immigrants like my wife Morena, low-skill knuckle-draggers like me, and everything in between. So does the U.S. Whatever immigration was back in the old Ellis Island days, give us your tired, your poor, etc. It's not that anymore. The line at your local immigration office has people from all walks of life. Take a number. Hey everybody, it's Daniel. Welcome back to Spain to Go, the best podcast in the entire multiverse for all things Spain. This is episode 114, and it's all about immigrant life. Immigration is a hot topic politically. It took me a long time to write this article, but as I'm recording the podcast, one of the top news stories is some riots in Los Angeles, over in California, which are in a way about immigration. I've been an immigrant for over 20 years now, and I've given quite a bit of thought to the topic. These are some of my conclusions, as it were. We'll also be hearing about my wife Morena, who is from a completely different background than mine and has also spent several years as an immigrant here in Spain. We've got a lot to talk about. First, you can donate to this podcast at expatmadrid.com/donate. Anything from €3 on up to however much you want. expatmadrid.com/donate. I appreciate any size donation that you can make. I do this for free because I like talking about Spain, but anything you could do to support would help. So expatmadrid.com/donate. Back to 21-year-old me, that first cold winter abroad. I remember my first room that I rented in one of the worst neighborhoods in Madrid. It was on the ground floor of a big building facing the street. The street was Paseo de Perales, and the neighborhood was Lucero. At one point, I bought a little cactus to remind me of home and put it out on the windowsill, where it was promptly stolen, my €1 cactus. I hope its new owners attached great sentimental value to it like I did. That winter, I would sit in my little room and read books, warming my hands with a cup of coffee. I was new in Madrid, and like I said, it was cold. I had never really been cold before, not for longer than a weekend. The climate was another layer to the adventure. There was the language, the loneliness, the semi-poverty, the fact that I had no right to be there and could possibly be deported, and then the weather. Someone from Minnesota is probably hearing this right now and objecting that it's not all that cold in Madrid, and these days I agree. On the other hand, I'm from the Arizona desert, and for the first couple of years I was, subjectively speaking, very cold. Fleeing from my native habitat at a young age, I noticed my personality was changing rapidly, adjusting to my new circumstances at light speed. I've always had a bit of a philosophical bent, and over that winter I came to a couple of pretty stark conclusions about life. 1. Nobody was coming to save me, and 2. This was all my fault. Previously, I had been rather idealistic, and I had had high hopes that some form of rational government would one day make my life better. But that went out the window when I moved to Spain. I was illegal. What was I expecting the Spanish government to do about my problems? Not much. Also, this whole plan was nobody's idea but mine. I had nobody to blame but myself for whatever happened next. Back in Phoenix, I could blame my parents or society for some of my shitty decisions. But my parents had never suggested moving abroad, and society had pretty strongly discouraged it. All this made me take some responsibility for my life in a way I had never done previously. If anything in my life was going to get better, it would have to be because I had set some goals or something. Hard work, thrift, and pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. It all sounded pretty obnoxious. At age 21, I thought people who talked like that were assholes. But the other options, poverty, imprisonment, and deportation, were worse. My second proper winter coat was olive green, the kind of thing that Spanish grandfathers wear. I shoplifted it from a large department store outside Madrid one chilly afternoon in October. It must have been 2005. Elsa had gone back to her country to be further subsidized by her government and had taken the frayed black coat with her. Meanwhile, it was getting cold, and English teaching being what it is, I hadn't really worked all summer. Classes had started back up in early October, but I wasn't expecting to get paid until November 5th. So I did what any cold, broke person from the desert would do. I walked into a department store, draped the first coat I saw over my arm, and casually walked back out. Now, more than 20 years later, I'm not proud of this, but at the time I was doing what I had to do. I couldn't pull myself up by my own bootstraps if I froze to death first. I figured that stealing from giant corporations is about as victimless as it gets, and that in some way I was sticking it to the man. Anyway, I was illegal. What could they possibly do? Deport me? Sure, but that could happen anyway. That first summer not working had been a shock to my already strained finances, but after that, moving into my second winter, things got better. I worked my ass off, giving all the classes I could, and trying to be a good teacher. By the next year, I was prepared for the summer, with a stack of 50s in my secret money sock, enough to pay the rent and buy food from July until early October. That green coat must have looked pretty dorky on me, but I didn't care. I was a man on a mission, and fashion wasn't a part of it. I had decided I was going to make my life in Spain, and I was willing to do whatever I had to in the process. I taught as many classes as I could, read books about self-improvement, and dated a couple of Spanish girls who must have found me charismatic. They sure weren't in it for my good looks. My lifestyle wasn't very exciting either, although not living with my parents gave me an advantage over some of the local competition. Spanish guys may have had cars and mullets and access to their parents' beach houses, but I had a rented room that was close to the center. The actual location was constantly changing, and an exotic foreign accent. Plus, I was excited about life. I dated around and had some adventures. I was feeling pretty optimistic. Also, this is important, I was feeling free from the social expectations of people back home. Life was going pretty well, except for the illegality. In fact, I remember those first couple of years as being a lot of fun. Part of that is probably because of my age and inexperience, but another part is surely the feeling that I had escaped the system. Back in 2002, I had dropped out of college when I realized how stupid it was to pay good money for someone to assign me a list of books to read. I wanted to do something with my life, not take more tests. If I had stayed home and followed the standard path, I could have finished college at age 22 or so. Then what? Get a job at Starbucks with my English Lit degree and $40,000 in student debt? Go to grad school and try to avoid adult life for another few years? Neither option seemed appealing. I could have tried to make it work as a college dropout back home. I had tried that, actually, for a couple of years before moving abroad, working bad coffee shop and cashier jobs in town, $7 an hour plus a fistful of dollars and quarters from the tip jar. I had grown up middle class, but riding around Phoenix on my bike in the summer heat, too broke to afford a car, with no college degree and no obvious talents, that sort of thing will knock the middle class right out of you. Maybe with a lot of luck and persistence, I could have made it to shift manager at a car wash or something, and if that didn't work out, there was always the place in front of the Safeway where I could sell plasma. All the realistic options sounded terrible, in other words. I felt like I had dodged a bullet by moving to Spain. But I needed to do something about getting legal. A few years went by. Slowly but surely, I was approaching 30, way too old to die young, and I was going to have to get my shit together. Being seasonally employed and illegal and living in rented rooms in Madrid's cheapest neighborhoods was fun for a while, but eventually it was going to be pathetic. Enter a long series of lawyers, each more incompetent than the last. For the next few years, I gathered papers, took them to government offices, and hoped for the best. My lawyers were sometimes a help, sometimes a hindrance. A letter in my files from one of those years invites me to abandon Spanish territory within 14 days, or else. That was a rejection for one of my visa applications, and it hurt. But I didn't go anywhere. Around this time, I started getting serious about blogging. I figured that if I got deported or had to leave, I could have some online income while I got back on my feet. With $800 a month, I could live it up in Costa Rica, or so I had heard. How many page views would I need to make that kind of money? Millions, as it turns out. Okay, well, maybe I would come up with some other idea. Best to keep plugging away at it. Finally, I got a work permit through Arraigo Social, a process that lets people legalize their situation if they've been in Spain for more than 3 years, and if they have a job offer from a legitimate company. It's what in the US these days we are calling a path to citizenship. I went down to Aluche to pick up my national identity card in May 2012, 7.5 years after first moving to Madrid. Standing in line, I had plenty of time to look over at the barred windows of the immigrant detainment center next door. The police compound had 1,000 people in a line snaking around the courtyard that morning, and some enterprising folks were selling tamales and Inca Cola outside the gates. After 4 hours standing in the sun, I had the card, a little piece of plastic that finally granted me the legal right to be in Spain. I speed-walked back to the metro. I wasn't even going to be late for my afternoon classes. The Great Recession hit Spain hard. The Spanish economy was in free fall by that time, with unemployment over 25%. Youth unemployment was twice that. A lot of Spanish people were emigrating. I was happy to just be working legally, por fin. Around that time, the Spanish government started offering immigrants who lost their jobs lump sum unemployment payments to just leave the country. Some did. It's unclear how many. Madrid certainly felt a lot emptier for a while there. Nobody was out spending money, businesses were closing up or being replaced by pawn shops. The metro was strangely quiet, fewer people going to work every day. The immigration statistics for the past couple of decades always come with a caveat. People from former Spanish colonies can get nationality after 2 years residence. After that, they're no longer counted as immigrants. So the number of South Americans drops off quite a bit in the 2010s, but maybe not from masses of people returning to their home countries. I hadn't been working long enough to get unemployment benefits that summer, and besides, I had to be on contract a certain number of days every year to renew my visa. I got a shitty summer job, 8 a.m. classes with boring executive types in offices outside town. At least the offices had AC. My house didn't. Giddy with excitement, I also swung by the health center in my neighborhood to get some of that famous European free health care I'd been hearing about. After an hour in a waiting room with all the local grannies, I saw a doctor. She agreed to give me a blood test. When the results came back, she scowled as she handed over the papers. "You need to stop eating cholesterol," she said. Never, I thought. Cholesterol is a myth. I wouldn't see the inside of a Spanish health center again until about 9 years later when I got COVID. And it turns out the health care wasn't actually free. I was paying for it every month, right out of my meager paycheck. As a legal immigrant, I found that I was actually making less money than before, because Social Security is quite expensive. That's one of the reasons why companies hire illegal immigrants to begin with. But I was happy to take the pay cut, because being legal was my whole life dream for years, and it had finally come true. Self-help for dropouts. All this time, I was dealing with the ups and downs of immigrant life. First of all, the language. I didn't actually have a personality in Spanish for the longest time. With the level of an ungrammatical 4-year-old, there wasn't much I could do to express myself. This was probably for the best. My post-teenage angst didn't translate between cultures, so I just dropped it. I spent a few years sitting around smiling and agreeing with people. Claro, por supuesto. Meanwhile, I read paperback books in Spanish or pored over the local newspapers on the metro, trying to learn more. I wanted to improve my Spanish, but I was also hoping to improve myself. One summer, in my shared flat in Vallecas, I had moved up to the second worst neighborhood in Madrid by this time. I downloaded a whole bunch of audio programs from Tony Robbins on LimeWire. For years I had been hearing about something called self-help. Most people were pretty disparaging about it. But those people also tended to be big losers. Coincidence? Probably not. Maybe self-help, I thought, would teach me how to be a better adult. So I downloaded a few gigabytes worth, thanks piracy, then spent several sweaty weeks listening to all those audios that had probably been ripped from cassette tapes in the 80s. Tony suggested, get this, that a person could improve his or her life by focusing on getting a little bit better every day. He also said that you could feel better by standing up straight and focusing on your goals with a strong burning desire. Where focus goes, energy flows, is how he put it. Strange. Nobody had ever suggested that to me before. Back home, people said, your middle school grades will follow you for the rest of your life, and everything's going to be on your permanent record. I had almost been kicked out of every school I had attended, except for college, which I quit, so I had basically failed at adulting by age 19. People around town had given up on me at that point, assuming the rest was going to be a long downhill slope. I wasn't a rule follower or a mindless conformist. Therefore, I would never be anything. Later, I would learn that the people back home were suffering from what psychologist Angela Duckworth calls a fixed mindset. I guess most people probably are. They think that if you're not joyfully doing your homework in second grade, preparing yourself for the Ivy League, you'll probably end up on welfare or in prison. That your abilities are fixed and they're not going to improve. The opposite, what the self-help gurus like Tony Robbins were suggesting, was a growth mindset. I liked Tony's philosophy better. Time to put that growth mindset to work. My third winter coat had lapels and big black buttons. It cost 70 euros at Zara. That seemed like a lot of money at the time, but I felt sophisticated as hell in that coat. Very European. Did I mention it had lapels? Lapels! Nobody back on the ranch had lapels on their coat. The journey of self-improvement I was on had several aspects. Expressing myself more positively, getting in shape, and dressing a bit better were just a few. I had also learned a lot of Spanish. I had gotten the C2 level certificate from Instituto Cervantes at one point, again because I thought I might need a backup hustle if I ever had to leave Spain. Not all of these experiments were successful. For example, I was trying to get over being an introvert for a while. It didn't work, of course, but I had a lot of fun in those years while forcing myself to socialize. This was before dating apps were mainstream, at least in Spain, so I had to meet girls and make friends the old-fashioned way. Talking to strangers became a thing I did regularly. But dating the locals was a bit of a mixed bag. One girl I dated from somewhere in La Mancha was studying for a civil service exam. She was a bit difficult to pin down on weekends. She would usually be back in her village, eating her mom's food and having her laundry done. One time she stuck around, though, and wanted to hang out. "Sorry," I said, "I'm working." She was shocked. "Working on Sunday? Why?" Immigrant life was why. I'm hardly a workaholic, but my drive to accomplish something was hard to understand for the girls I dated. Then again, I didn't have parents I could just count on to pay my rent and do my laundry if things went badly for me. I didn't even consider myself ambitious, really, but I had spent some time scraping by near the bottom edge of society, and now I wanted to put a large distance between myself and that whole situation. Living highly subsidized lives, a lot of Europeans don't really understand the hustle. I don't want to get too political here, but in my experience, the European version of socialism tends to create dependence and a feeling of learned helplessness. People don't want to do anything unless the government is going to cut them a check. As a result, many people out here don't understand the bootstraps cliché at all. They tend to want to do the minimum to get by. Entrepreneur is sort of a dirty word. The ideal job for most Spaniards is to work for the government. Working through the Great Recession. The economic crisis of 2009 to 2017 was good for language teaching, more or less. A lot of people wanted to learn English or German so that they could emigrate. Spanish emigration is a whole topic of its own. The locals were leaving in droves, going up to the UK or to Germany or to Scandinavia. Sometimes they would end up working as waiters or folding sweaters in a thara far from home, the thara in their local town having refused to hire them because they didn't speak English. I could relate. I had never gotten a call back when I applied at the McDonald's back home. And so here I was, living my immigrant life far away. For a while during the recession, I had considered moving to a new country myself. All the articles about brain drain had me thinking that the smart people were getting out. If I stayed, maybe I wasn't as smart as I thought. But having a work visa changed everything. By 2012, I was in Spain through thick and thin. But getting legal was different than staying legal, because now I had to work enough on-contract hours to be able to renew my card for a few years. This involved taking a pay cut thanks to Social Security and taxes, but it was worth it. For a long time, my biggest dream had been to become a normal tax-paying citizen with rights. Now I was one, and it felt great. Meanwhile, the economic crisis dragged on. Things got worse, then slowly better. Nobody's salaries were increasing, but at least I had a job, and my only expenses were food and a rented room. A lot of people who had bought houses when times were good were now regretting their decision, and also unable to sell. All through these years, I was writing books for English learners in addition to teaching as many hours as I could. I would sell the books on my blogs and on YouTube. Soon I was making a bit of extra income, then a bit more. Eventually, I had done all the on-contract hours I needed, and I was able to quit one of my day jobs. The one with the boss up in Barcelona who would call to harass me about my lesson plans and tell me what Esther in HR thought about my teaching style. I quit by email an hour before I was supposed to be in class and suddenly felt lighter. Victory, or at least a small taste of it. A lot of life happened in the middle of the recession. I dated a few girls, turned 30, and got thoroughly sick of doing the same thing every day for 11 euros an hour. But my online business was steadily improving. By 2014, I could afford to live alone. Real estate prices had been crashing for about 5 years at that point. When times were good, half the landlords would just hang up the phone when they heard a foreign accent. Now people were practically begging you to rent places. I moved out of Vallecas into a much nicer neighborhood in the north. Spain was in crisis, but I was doing pretty well. Moving on up to the north side. My fourth winter coat was a gray ski jacket from the North Face. A student at one of my company classes had had a nice North Face jacket and seemed to be a cool guy as well. It was aspirational for me. I would get a nice coat and be a cool middle-class guy. I don't remember how much that coat cost, but I had to take the train all the way up to Las Rozas to get it at the outlet mall. Buying brand names at full price still seemed absurd to me, even though I had doubled my income. Finally, I renewed the last of my temporary visas. I was 33 years old and had a steady job, no roommates, and I was a permanent resident, living the Spanish dream. But my new plan was to quit my day jobs entirely. I was making good money online at least some months. Now it was time to declare victory over the Spanish labor market once and for all. I circled a date on the calendar. June 30th, 2015 was Victory in Europe Day. I would be finishing the school year that day, and I'd have the whole summer to build up my business, plus every month after that. I swore an oath to myself. No more English lessons. No more $11 an hour. That spring, I traveled to the UK and to the Netherlands, getting some mileage out of the new coat, plus the fact that I could finally afford to be a tourist in more expensive countries. June 30th came, I cashed my final paycheck, and I was free. If you had told Daniel from 2005 about this, he wouldn't have believed it was possible. But that's the power of improving things just a little, day by day. With that, I was done with the Spanish labor market. I also thought I was done with immigration. Little did I know. Hanging with highly skilled immigrants. Morena came to Spain from the tropics in South India for a PhD program. When we met, she had enough money to pay her rent and go to the giant Carrefour for groceries, but not enough to stay warm. Buying a comforter for her bed when she arrived, she told me, had almost bankrupted her. On our first date, she told me she had just been to the dentist. I later found out she didn't have money to fill her cavities. Still, when I told her I was a blogger, she pitied me and bought me a beer. The rest, as they say, is history. We're married now. In any case, she was on the highly skilled end of the immigration spectrum, with an international science grant paying for her to do a PhD in Spain. She worked in a lab putting cells on tiny sensors or something. Presumably, this would keep her here for a few years, and then she would go off to be a scientist somewhere else. After a few months, though, she quit her job at the lab, back to the immigration drawing board. A new series of lawyers told us she would have to figure out another way to stay in Spain. Her highly skilled visa was only valid for that one PhD program, so officially, she wasn't supposed to be here anymore. The lawyer said it was unlikely, but that they might send her a letter inviting her to leave the country. In the meantime, we had a year and a half before her national ID card expired. She briefly got a job at a university lab, which lasted about a week. Then she spent a few months taking tourists on Segway tours around Plaza Mayor. Finally, a bit desperate, she asked me for career advice. "You like talking," I said. "Why don't you try sales?" Fateful words, those. Soon she had a job interview up in Barcelona, and a few weeks later we were moving here so she could start her first sales job. I was less than thrilled with this, but I assumed it would be temporary. We rented a tiny one-bedroom flat near the beach over a little plaza full of schizophrenics. After all those years in Madrid, it was time for a new adventure. How bad could it be? Well, we were both about to find out how bad. Morena called me on her lunch break, her first day in her sales job. She was having a bit of a freak out. Apparently, the job she had moved here for required cold calling CEOs to sell some sort of high-ticket event. There were no leads, so in practice this meant finding companies online, looking for a phone number, then calling and trying to get through to the CEO. Not an easy task. If she did get through to the CEO, she was supposed to ask for 32,000 euros. I could see why she was freaking out. Back in my teaching days, I had given classes to some salespeople. They had told me that your first couple of years are all about cold calling and getting rejected over and over. If you're still in the game after that, you'll be just fine. I told this to Morena, but it didn't help. Those were some difficult years. In the middle, she had to go back to India while we got her a new visa. This visa we got through Pareja de Hecho, with the help of an expensive lawyer here in Barcelona. Pareja de Hecho is like a civil union. Not exactly marriage, but official cohabitation. It was a slow and difficult process, and I guess it could have gone either way. But it was manageable now that I was making good money with my online business. Then there was a global pandemic. Morena made it back to Spain just a few days before everything locked down in 2020. Working from home in our tiny flat, she got a couple more sales jobs, cold calling CEOs with various pitches. One company had her looking for counterfeit goods on Amazon, then calling up the legitimate owner of the brand and trying to sell a software solution to protect their intellectual property. The next company was an HR startup with little in the way of an actual product. After a couple of years, she moved to a legit multinational company. One thing we both discovered while dealing with work culture in Spain is that around half of the workforce is actively trying to avoid doing any sort of work at all. The pandemic only gave office types extra excuses to be lazy. If before they were forced to get out of bed and get dressed in order to go to the office and avoid work, during the work from home period, people would take occasional meetings in bed and otherwise make little pretense of working. Just by doing her job, Morena ended up outperforming the average. Once she started working harder, she was quickly promoted to management, then promoted again, and then promoted again. She currently leads a team of about 18 people. It's been quite a journey for both of us, and perhaps not typical. But who's got a monopoly on typical? Morena and I both moved to Spain hoping to improve our lives. Despite wildly different backgrounds, we did. It took a lot of hard work, some long struggles with bureaucracy, and a willingness to do what had to be done, often in difficult circumstances. In a way, it sounds like the type of story that immigrants everywhere hope to be able to tell someday. It's the dream of a lot of people in shitty situations, to move somewhere better and make it work, despite the obstacles. And I haven't mentioned it elsewhere, but I had plenty of help along the way. The bosses at the language school who sponsored my first work visa, some older Spanish friends who took me into their homes and introduced me to all kinds of Spanish cuisine and culture, successful students who told me about their lives, expanding my ideas of what was possible for a motivated person to achieve. Most of my inspiration for writing this, though, comes from Morena. She gets phone calls from time to time from people back home who want to make the move to Europe. Most of the time her advice is, it's not worth it. Just stay home. Curious, I asked her if she thought that moving to Spain was worth it for her. Oh yeah, she said, 1,000,000%. So why, I asked, are you telling people not to come? Because they have to know the downsides. It's true, and it's a bit of a dilemma. Neither of us knew the downsides of living as an immigrant, and in hindsight, it was totally worth it. But it would be very dishonest to tell people to just hop on a plane and come to Europe, without giving them a feel for the reality of immigrant life. Being cold for 9 months a year, mostly or completely alone, and unable to afford any of the foods you like, don't underestimate what that will do to your sense of optimism. And what about the language? Learning a new language in school is one thing. Being surrounded by it 24 hours a day and unable to speak your native language is another. A part of your personality withers and dies far from home. For me, that's less of a problem. But for Morena and her native language, you've never heard of it. It's a real issue. Then there's the bureaucracy and the flirting with poverty and the fact that you don't know how the legal system works. And then there's the shady landlords and the trying to rent a room when you don't speak the language and don't have money for a deposit or anyone local to vouch for you. And the shitty jobs and the moldy flats and the short-term relationships and the feeling of being an outsider and the fact that you're definitely missing out on life back home, so somehow or other you had better make this worth it. And then there's the darkness in winter and the struggle and the despair. And I know the cold is subjective, but have I mentioned the cold? So, to emigrate or to stay where you are, I wouldn't wish my 7 years of illegality on anyone. Also, those are some of the best years of my life. A bit of a contradiction, isn't it? Morena and I both agree that if we had known what we were getting into, we never would have done this. Then again, if you really want to make a life for yourself abroad, you're going to have to ignore all the well-meaning advice from people back home anyway. That's what I did, and it worked out fine. Most people back on the ranch didn't know anything about Spain, but they still had plenty of advice. Couldn't you just move to Portland, they would say? Or better yet, have you considered seeing a psychologist? I heard that one quite a lot. But I had been dealing with reasonable adults for some time at that point, and I knew they were wrong about almost everything. For about a decade, I made it my life's mission to prove that they were wrong about me as well. And it worked. The whole stupid bootstraps cliché. Anyway, this is the conclusion. Immigrant life isn't easy. There's still a park out in Poblano that we walk past from time to time, and Morena says, this is where I would come to cry on my lunch breaks, back when I was at my first sales job. I call it emotional geography, the way that certain places etch themselves into your brain so that a nondescript patch of grass or cement can take you on a mental journey to another time. Back in Madrid, I have the street corners in Vallecas where I walked during the recession, looking for cheap protein, or the hotel bars where I would go to work on my laptop when I was feeling down about building my business. I figured that looking at successful people while I worked might rub off on me somehow. And maybe it did. All this to say, living abroad isn't for everyone. These days, Morena and I are the reasonable adults, telling people they're better off just staying home. It's discouraging for them, but if you're plunged into despair by some gentle discouragement, you're really not going to like all the shit that immigrant life throws at you. On the other hand, life isn't supposed to be easy, and struggling bravely to achieve your goals beats sitting on your ass watching Netflix and wondering what might have been. Life is short. Make something happen. That is about all I've got for today. This is my mic drop. I don't really know what I have to say after this. I'm going to take a few weeks off from podcasting. It took me, believe it or not, about 1.5 years to write that article. I wrote most of it over a couple of months, 2 years ago, and then I just left it because I hated the ending that I came up with. So last week I just happened to find the draft again in my drafts folder, and I decided to change it up a little bit, liked the result enough to publish it. Here we are. Immigration, of course, is a hot topic these days, and one of the larger points I'm making here is that the upper middle class liberal stereotypes about immigration in the US are basically wrong, or at least so incomplete as to be largely useless. I've been an immigrant for over 20 years. I've met a lot of other people in that time, and there are all kinds of people with all kinds of goals moving abroad. Sweeping generalizations like immigration is good or immigration is bad are far too simplistic. Just like everyone else, some immigrants are a net positive for society, and others are not. But that's not a very good political slogan. Please like and subscribe to this podcast wherever it is you're listening to it. You can give me a star rating if you're on Apple or on Spotify. You know the drill. Go to expatmadrid.com/donate to send some money to this project. I will be back in a few weeks, I assume, with more to say about life in Spain. The news sucks recently, so I'm just not touching it. But I guess at some point something interesting will happen and I'll be forced to come back and write some more. There's this poem by William Butler Yeats that I think of quite a bit. It's called Adam's Curse. Poetically, it's pretty good, but he talks about his theory that being a poet is the hardest of all jobs, and it would be better to be breaking stones or scrubbing floors or something because those people actually have easy lives compared to the lives of a poet. I am not a poet, and I disagree with that statement. I think that writing is actually pretty hard in a way, but it's something my brain just wants to do, and I show no signs of being able to stop. So here we are. You can read the poem, it's online. It's called Adam's Curse by William Butler Yeats. But every time I spend a day doing things like this, I'm pretty thankful that I'm not actually out digging ditches, or I figured my best option if I had stayed back home was maybe to channel my limited amount of Spanish to like selling used pickup trucks from some dusty lot out in the desert. I can like imagine myself wearing a cowboy hat and, speaking with a Mexican accent and stuff. That would be a whole different adventure. I don't know. Back in episode 80, I talk about randomness and creating your own luck. I do believe in luck. I also believe in hard work and the fact that a lot of stuff in life is just random anyway. So things just turn out in certain ways that we never would have predicted. While we're here, head over to biketourinSpain.com and check out my friend Raul's bike tours. Raul started this because he lived in the Netherlands for a couple of decades, and he always thought that bike touring, which is kind of a national sport up there, was a lot of fun, but it hadn't really been developed in Spain. So when he moved back to Spain, he started a bike tour company, biketourinSpain.com. I've been on two of his tours, the Route of Don Quixote and also one that went across the region of Extremadura. I think the first one was about 150 kilometers, the second one a bit longer. Extremadura is episode 94 of this podcast, if you would like to have a listen. It was literally one of the best Spain-based experiences I have had in 20 years of living here, almost 21 years now. Episode 94 for that, or just head over to biketourinSpain.com. When you sign up, tell Raul that Daniel from the podcast sent you. I'm not getting a commission or anything, but Raul will appreciate it. I also have a couple of friends with some cool businesses that will help you out if you are coming to Spain for the summer or whatever. We have Walks Tours. Go to expatmadrid.com/walks. They have several cities in Spain and also Italy and other places. I did the Prado tour where you get into the Prado before it's open to the public. expatmadrid.com/walks. That's an affiliate link, so I do get a small commission on that if you sign up. I really liked the Prado tour with them, and I think they do Sagrada Familia here in Barcelona and some other things. Just check it out, expatmadrid.com/walks. That will have several options for you to choose from Spain and elsewhere in Europe. Also, my friend Lauren started this business called Devour Tours. It used to be Madrid Food Tour, and then it was Barcelona Food Tour and Sevilla Food Tour. Now it's just Devour Tours because they are also all over Europe and in a couple of places in the US, I believe. So I highly recommend that as well. expatmadrid.com/devour. Just head on over there and look at their different tours. They have Madrid, Barcelona, Seville, etc. They also have market tours where they take you to a local sort of municipal market and they feed you some excellent fresh local produce. I think they do Mercado de Santa Caterina here in Barcelona, which is a little bit far from my house these days, but it's my favorite market. I go every time I'm in that area. So expatmadrid.com/devour, DEVOUR for that. Nothing else for today. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you for listening. If you're here 45 minutes in, I appreciate you. And until next time, from beautiful Barcelona, hasta la próxima. Bye.